Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name's Debbie from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. We have a return special guest speaker today, Mr. Kevin Chen. Hello, Kevin.
Hey, Debbie. Great to be on the podcast again.
Yeah, of course, Kevin is from Paramount Disability Homes, and we've spoken a couple of times in the last few months, but the reason we're chatting today is to review something we spoke about back in September last year. We had an episode, if you want to go back and listen to it, it was episode 324, talking about the winding up of the funding from the state government to the group homes, the SDA and NDIS group homes in Victoria, that was supposedly set to kick in on the 31st of December. Didn't necessarily go as planned, and it's a very timely point, I think, now to review what has been going on in that space and where things are at, and just to review the SDA market in general in Victoria.
Yeah, happy to provide some updates in regards to what's been happening. I think the first thing is the Victorian market in general. So what we've been seeing is pretty much all the new pipeline in Victoria has been in your infill areas, in your metropolitan areas, and we're seeing a lot of development of low density housing. So 3 participant houses, you've got a lot of villas coming through, and the main sort of investors behind these buildings are institutional funders and capitals. So they are the ones that probably have access, because these investments aren't cheap, we understand, and they're the ones that can deliver with scale in this space. We're also seeing a lot of smaller private developers and investors that are coming in, and they building, their second and third, fourth projects. But we're not really seeing any more stock come up in any of the greenfield and further out areas, which is a good thing.
It's a very good thing, yeah. And look, that makes sense, because obviously I think everyone realised that there was no point continuing to build in those areas. And if you need to finance that, you're not going to get finance either for that kind of a build. So, yeah. So you're seeing quite a lot of development going on in those inner and mid-ring areas.
Yeah, definitely. So seeing a lot of development in the right areas, which is what we've been sort of saying from the start of when I got onto this podcast. We need supply in those areas. So I guess the whole sort of SDA community and advisors, the architects, the funders know that's the way to go. And we've seen it, but not obviously on the scale of how quickly all the greenfield development came on. But we will see a very healthy trend continue to roll out across Metro Victoria. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good to hear. So, okay, that's the supply, upcoming supply in the right areas now. And from what you're seeing, are they getting it right with the types of properties and the categories? Yeah,
definitely getting it right in terms of providing high physical support, usually in the houses having 3 participants, which is better than the 2 participant model for all the funding changes. And a lot of villa product, which is a good alternative to the apartments. So a lot of the participants want to be on the ground. They don't want to use a concierge service. So it's a very good alternative for the ones that want to live individually. We are seeing a big shortage of robust housing still in metropolitan. I guess everyone is just, quite wary of the property damage. And especially if you're investing more money on land, people are sort of shying away from robust in metropolitan areas. So if you want a robust villa or a house, it's yeah, you're not going to really find one too close to the city is what we're seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a shame. I was just speaking to someone earlier today up here in Brisbane a provider actually, they're desperate for robust housing. And he specifically mentioned needing it on more larger sites and blocks and even on acreage, but, not too far out, obviously. But there's such a desperate undersupply of robust, particularly in the northern parts of Brisbane. But yeah, no one's building for the reasons that you mentioned. They're concerned that for the cost that they've got to put into it, the capital they've got to put into this, there's just too much risk. So I don't know what the answer is there.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think once high physical support dwellings are sort of reached its supply cap, then we'll see probably more investors get into the robust space. But yeah, it is the owner's responsibility to pay for all property damage, as you are aware. So, some properties you might be spending 30, 40,000 per year just to replace the property, especially if you don't have insurance.
And that's not viable for people from an investment perspective. But having said that, to a large degree, isn't the whole point of building it to the robust specifications designed to heavily minimize property damage?
Yes and no.
Are they just not building it well enough, or?
Yeah, definitely not building it well enough. And what we're seeing is that obviously you've got your minimum design standards, which
are not good enough.
Yeah, not good enough. And builders are going to cut corners. And what we're also seeing is most participants that have robust funding will require a heavy degree of upfront modifications, especially if they have property damage tendencies. And what that means is the investor actually has to fork out an extra, 10 to 20 grand sometimes to cover for the modifications because the participant doesn't have that in their NDIS funding. And if they were to apply, they would have to wait 6 months, up to 12 months, and they won't get coverage over all that. So yeah, the robust build is just not built to a high enough standard. And yeah, investors don't know that they have to put in an extra 10, 20 grand. Very, very common. And the places are still getting sort of, still prone to property damage. So, it should be, in my opinion, the highest funded category in SDA, but it's lower than high physical support. So it's...
Yeah. And of course, the fact that the majority of participants with robust need to live on their own.
Yep.
So it doesn't make a house feasible. And, it only really works in the villa, but the villa funding is much lower than house funding. So yeah, overall, it's not being catered for from a financial return point of view for sure. That's probably a big problem, a big reason why the robust properties are still heavily undersupplied.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, this is not just a conversation on robust. Let's talk about any other aspects of the SDA market in general, or do you want to talk more about the whole group home phase out?
Yeah, let's talk about the group home phase out. So it's been about 6 months since we had that last conversation, might be a bit longer, but Paramount's been really, really busy in the last 3 months as an SDA provider because we've been working with majority of the group home operators that have done SIL. When I say group home operators, they're the SIL providers that have been delivering their services with the Victorian Government in their housing over the last 10 years. So there are so many people and participants that are currently residing in the group home. So just revisiting the stats, there's about 600 enrolled SDAs with the Victorian Government. And what we're seeing right now is a mass transition of these participants from old builds to new builds. There is obviously no standardized process yet. And what I mean by that is every provider or SIL provider is taking a different approach on how they want to transition the people from the old house to the new house. So yeah, it's sort of all over the place right now, but I can shed some more light, I guess, in how different providers are, transitioning participants.
That'd be great. A little more information on that would be really useful.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of points that we didn't see coming and have taken us by surprise. So number one is not all participants want to move. So we had the assumption that just because you build a new build house that's next door on the next street to an old government legacy property, that everyone will pack up their bags and shift over. And that's just not been the case. There's been a lot of people that sentimental to where they have lived and they really enjoy it, and they just don't want to move, which is fair enough. So, and to our surprise as well, a lot of their government homes, some of them are actually quite modern and they're usually a little bit more spacious than the new build SDA. So they're actually really big properties. You'd be surprised. So not all the government properties are run down and in terrible condition. Some are, but not all. So I guess the first approach that we're seeing with all the still providers is that the first step is to understand who out of the cohort wants to move, right? So that means that they have to approach each individual in each house and consult with their families, with all the relevant stakeholders like their support coordinators and might be their spouses, their children, and find out, what it would be like if, we delivered a new house next door. How open are you to moving? I think about 60 to 70% of people want to move, which is a good thing. And then the next step would be to go through a funding review, because obviously the SDA funding they were grandfathered into the scheme. So the SDA funding is definitely not sufficient, anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000. And also there's SIL funding, which is usually on a 1:5 ratio, which doesn't work as well if they were to move to a 3-resident house. So collecting that data as a next step with the relevant stakeholders. So things like functional capacity assessments, OT reports. We've just got to collate all the evidence so we can go to the NDIS and we need to justify to them why they need new build funding or why they need to be supported from a 1:5 ratio to a 1:3 ratio. So that's the second step. And that takes about 6 months. So with a lot of these providers, we've actually already started this process last year. So we're seeing more and more approvals with a very, very high success rate, which is very good from the NDIS. They've been approving a lot of 1 to 3.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah. So we haven't actually seen a single case of funding that's been knocked back, which is really good news. But to get all your ducks in a row and to get the housing ready at the time when everyone's ready to move out is the hardest part. So what that might look like is participant A got their funding approval. Participant B also got their funding approval, but the third participant still has their review. Now, how it just depends on who the landlord is, because the landlord might not want to take on that level of risk, even though we can assure them that they're going to get the funding, but they don't want to take on the third client. So they might not be able to move collectively, or they have to move as a collective, and you've got to wait for the third person. And the investor might not be willing to wait for an extra 3 months or 4 months. So it's all about balancing out timing. And that's the biggest element with these transitions is timing.
Yeah. So a lot involved. And I was going to say, I think the hardest part would be the funding, but I guess equally hard, as you said, is the just finding out who wants to move and where to and who with, and having everyone sort of on the same page there. What other issues are involved? So you've got just the participant needs to want to move out of the house that they're currently in. Their funding, both their SDA funding needs to be increased and their SIL funding needs to be decreased or increased in amount, but decreased from 1:5 to 1:3 is what I meant by that. And what other pieces of the pie are there?
Yeah. So we are forgetting about what about the participants that don't want to move?
Yeah.
So that's a huge sort of population as well. And I think every SIL provider is taking a different approach. Some I agree with and some I just don't. But so some providers are putting an end date to and ceasing services at a specific time frame. So say the end of this year, they won't be delivering SIL services anymore in the house. So if you don't want to move, what they're saying is we'll provide you with an option, a new build option. But if you don't want to move, then we're ceasing service by this date and you're going to have to find yourself a new SIL provider. Other providers most providers are taking that approach, but some providers are actually helping them source a new SIL provider. They're working out different options on trying to source new properties, or if they don't, some providers are also not ceasing services. So it's just, how responsible do you want to be for those participants that don't want to move? And a lot of the big steel providers, they don't have the capacity to care about that, which is really, really disappointing. Yeah.
Back in September, our last episode on this subject, we were talking about potentially around 5,000 participants in these situations. Is that still a relatively accurate number?
I think so.
Yeah.
So
we're talking about, as you said, maybe up to 1,000 people who don't want to move.
We haven't seen that
a lot of people.
But yeah, but it would be close to 1,000 maybe.
Yeah. And let's say we've got a participant, lives currently in one of the old group homes that was grandfathered in. They're very happy there. They love their life. Their SIL provider says they've got till the end of the year. But is that, who actually owns these properties?
The Victorian government.
So the government owns these properties. Yes. So what's going to happen to these properties after they're vacated?
So the Victorian government, they are an SDA provider as well, right? So just like us. So
yeah,
I don't know what their intentions will be. I assume that for a lot of the properties that are completely vacated, they might take back those assets. They're really good on the balance sheet, obviously, for the government. They might sell off, or I don't know what they'll do with those assets. But the ones that still have participants in them, I think the state government, as the SDA provider, it would be their responsibility to go and help the participant find a new service provider. But the challenge in that is, like, let's just say you've got 5 people and 3 people have moved out, and you've got 2 people that are on a 1-to-5 funding ratio. No new SIL provider is willing to step in. So it would just make sense that everyone in the cohort just goes through an uplift on both an SDA and SIL level, because that gives you the option, hey, you might not want to move today, but at least you can stay, and a SIL provider can come in and still support you in that old SDA.
Yeah. Okay, so it's still very complicated. Still got a long way to go. How many participants would you guess at this point, percentage-wise, have already been migrated into new properties?
Oh, I would say we're still early stages. So probably less than 10% of the cohort would have undergone a transition. And those are the sort of smaller, more agile SIL providers that onto this very, very early on. And we had some really, really successful transitions. And it's been a really good outcome for the investors, because they don't have to wait for participant matching. They know that these people are compatible, that they want to live in the property for the rest of their life. And, they appreciate it. They're genuinely very, very happy with, how new the amenities, how new the facilities are. And so it's very, very rewarding for investors and also for the participants that have successfully transitioned. But a bulk of the participants that we're working with right now are still collating the evidence, and we're still with the NDIS going through the review at the moment. So this is the phase we're in.
And that's just such a big job for the NDIA to review that many participants' plans in the SIL and SDA space. So I can imagine that's a backlog there that's going to take time for them to process. As you said, 6 months. So it's not surprising at all. So if you're an investor, you were saying before that some investors, won't take on 2 participants only when they're expecting that third with the SDA funding. What I would say to one of those investors, look, it might not be guaranteed. It's not in the plan yet, but isn't 2 participants with a decent amount of funding already a good return? Why are you so desperate to hold out for 3 to move together? It could be 6 months to a year before you get that result. Aren't you better off actually getting an income now?
Absolutely. I think what they're scared of is that there's no assurance that that third participant is definitely going to get, uplifted in their funding. But as you're right, 2 participants on the 1 to 3 is usually a lot of money. And but yeah, it's investors always have that expectation at most times that they want all 3 rooms filled, and they want, as close to the highest income as possible. So it's, as an SDA provider, I guess that's the hardest part, is balancing the expectations because we don't, want to say no to the third client. That's not fair, just because they're undergoing an SDA review. The other thing is like that we've seen a 100% success rate in getting funding uplifts, but investors don't seem to trust us. Just because we say 100%, everyone says, what if? Yeah. So I guess that's the hardest part, is balancing expectations.
Yeah. Well, look, I know you've got to rush, Kevin, so I won't keep you any longer, but I think that's just a really good summary of where that whole process is at. As far as you're concerned, we still haven't reached saturation if you're looking at what's in the pipeline in the metropolitan parts of Melbourne to meet this future supply that is going to be needed. So if you are someone who I guess has an old property that you're willing to maybe look at doing a knockdown rebuild, this is still a very viable option, would you say?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is obviously one type or demographic of participants, and you've obviously got new build participants. You've also seen people shift from, greenfield areas back into infield areas. So there's a lot of demand right now in metropolitan Melbourne. If you build in the right area, you're going to get a good outcome. Yeah, even if you build the wrong product, you're going to get people that inquire. So yeah, it's very strong at the moment.
Yeah, a lot of unmet demand now and moving into the next couple of years, I guess.
At least, yeah. So we'll be very busy for the next 2 or 3 years, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like you will be. All right, Kevin, look, I'll wrap it up there. I think that's a really good overview of where we're at. So thank you for your time. And we look forward to chatting again in the future.
No problem. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Debbie. Thanks.
Okay. That's it for today. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.